interesting thing is when you tell yourself to go and do, you're going to have a lot of yaysayers. And you're also going to have a lot of naysayers. But I talk about this in the book. Sometimes the biggest naysayer in our lives is the man or woman looking at us in the mirror. Just like we have to tell our naysayers, hey, listen, I respect your opinion, but I'm going forward. In the book I talk about, sometimes you have to look in the mirror and you have to tell your biggest naysayer, hey, I'm too strong for this. I'm too strong to sit here and do nothing.
On the 72nd episode of Passion in Progress, we talk about self-development with the author Pierre Simon. Pierre just finished his first book, The Flight of the Phoenix. And in this episode, we talk about his trials and tribulations with coming out with the book itself, as well as tips for implementing personal growth, happiness, and living in what is as opposed to what if. If you guys do get value out of this show, all I ask is that you share it with somebody that you think would get value out of this show as well. Let's go ahead and jump into this 72nd episode with the author of The Flight of the Phoenix, Pierre Simon. What is up, Merce Nation? Javier Mercedes here for yet again another Passion in Progress show, where we talk to inspiring individuals, and hopefully through hearing their stories, you too are motivated to go out and pursue your passions as well. We have our first author on the show today, Pierre Simon, the author of The Flight of the Phoenix. How's it going, man?
Man, I could not be happier to be here. It's going really well. I did not know I was the first author on the show. So that's pretty cool. Super excited about that.
Recently, I was invited to an event that you were giving a speech about your book and everything, and then we had a little interaction, and I thought to myself, man, it would be really cool to hear about the process of what it took to write your book. And lo and behold, part of your book is about you writing your book.
Yeah.
So The Flight of the Phoenix, what's it about and who's it for?
I'll start with the second question. It's really for everybody. The Flight of the Phoenix was and is a passion project of mine. It was a passion project for 10 years. And I started writing the book back in 2000 and maybe 2007. And, how it began, the story of how it began is just absolutely insane. I witnessed an event that was just incredible to me and thought to myself, maybe I'll write a little bit of this down. And as I started writing and kind of this chapter started to go with this chapter, I thought to myself, this could kind of be something. But, the interesting thing is I never wanted to write unless I felt inspired to write. So a lot of people don't know, it took me 10 years to write the book because I refused to write unless I felt some level of inspiration at that time. So I remember specifically one morning I woke up at 3:43 and I said, I'm inspired. I hadn't written in 2 to 3 months and I was just inspired. I was super excited. Grabbed my notebook, start writing, wrote one sentence. Inspiration went away. I was like, this is terrible.
There are so many people in the audience that could relate to that for sure.
Yes. The funny thing is in those moments though, and I tell this story all the time because even though I wrote one sentence, in my mind, it was the most amazing sentence I've ever written. And I believe a lot of that comes because it was written via inspiration. And so I think The Flight of the Phoenix, the reason why I say it's for everyone is because it's about life and how we look at life, but it was written through inspiration. So, it's been a very fun ride. And, that day that you were actually at the event, that was a book signing. I've been on this book tour, 9-city book tour, and it's been phenomenal so far.
All right, so let's go ahead and dive into some details to give the audience what the book is all about. Is there a certain story or anything that you want to tell from it, or you want to give a little precursor?
Yeah, so, my favorite quote in the book is, look how far you've come from the point you thought was the end. So in all of our lives, we face obstacles, we face difficulties, and sometimes we face certain obstacles and we think to ourselves, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. And oftentimes it happens multiple times throughout our journeys towards success. But in those moments, if you think about those times where you thought to yourself, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this, but you had to get out of it because you're currently in another moment. That's the beauty of The Flight of the Phoenix. It encourages us to look at those moments and think about how did we get out of that? What did we put into place in order to move forward? Specifically, there's a story in the book, one of my favorite stories in the book. It's the Mile High Pinball.
Mm-hmm.
So check this out. So I'm sitting down on a flight back to Houston one day, and I'm writing and I'm editing in one of the previous chapters, and I'm sitting right over the engine in the middle seat, the worst place to be sitting because it's loud and you have no room especially when you're trying to write a book.
Great place to write a book.
Great place to write a book. But the interesting thing about writing a book is when you're writing, you always try to find meaning in something. So I'm sitting there and I'm kind of writing, and this woman stands up. She's about 15 rows ahead, and she kind of starts to stumble a little bit. And she's kind of stumbling, and I'm like, what is going on here? So she's kind of stumbling, so much so that she actually ends up on the floor of the airplane. She fell to the floor. And so everyone gasps and they sigh, and of course they get on the speaker. Is there an MD in the room or on the plane? Now, at this time, I'd only watched about 4 seasons of Grey's Anatomy, so I wasn't qualified yet to go assist.
That 5th season will definitely get you in there.
Oh, yeah. 5th season, ding, ding, I would have rung my bell,
Yeah.
So an MD finally went to her aid, and they checked her out. Turns out, absolutely nothing was wrong with her. She had been traveling all day. She stood up too fast. She was dehydrated. She didn't have any food because she had been traveling all day from plane to plane. And she just got a little case of vertigo and just got dizzy and fell. Now, here I am writing a book. So I'm writing and figure out, okay, this has to mean something. What does this mean? And sure enough, nothing's wrong with her. So I'm like, oh, perfect.
Where's the meaning in that?
Where's the meaning?
Yeah.
I know. So, I should have been happy that nothing was wrong. But, when you're writing, you're always trying to find meaning. So I'm like, all right, well, great. But then the guy next to me, his name was Jake Sloss, and he's actually in the book, and I promised him I would put him in the book. He leans to me and he says, well, I guess sometimes you just have to get back up. And I looked to him and I said, there it is. There it is right there.
Yeah.
So I tell that story because as we walk down our journeys of life, in her case, she was walking to the back lavatory. When we're walking down our journeys of life, sometimes things will happen to us. And they will just happen. We'll often try to, we spend time, years, and energy and focus on why did this happen? And sometimes there's a reason, but sometimes there is no reason. We just have to get back up and continue down our journey of life, down our path towards success. The most interesting thing about the story to me is happened actually as I was in editing. I was editing the final editing with the chapter, and as I was reading through it again, and I noticed something. There were about 200 people on the plane, and one woman caught the attention of about 200 people on a plane. And I began to think about to myself, how many people do I have the ability to affect either positively or negatively in any given day? For her, it was 200 people. Okay. So with you and I here, I've done the math ahead of time. So you take 200 times 2 times 365. And if my math serves me correctly, that's about, let's see what we have here. It's about 146,000 people that just you and I can affect on any given day. So that stood out. That story stands out to me, the Mile High Pinball, because we really have a choice in life with this story. When things happen that we don't understand, we can sit there and wallow and spend that time and energy trying to figure out why did this happen to me, or we can just get back up and continue down our journey and path to success. And then on the other side, as we continue down that journey, remember, we all have an opportunity to positively affect people as we go throughout our lives. But more importantly, how much further would our country be if each of us said, I'm going to wake today and choose to affect the next person positively, whether it be a handshake, hold the door open, take a vested interest in their day. How are you today? How can I be of service to you? How much further would our country be if we thought like that?
That's the sound of, that's me hitting the button for mind blown. A personal story of mine to accentuate what you're talking about, and I'm sure everybody listening in the audience has some sort of story that could relate to the butterfly effect. I'm just so obsessed with that kind of interaction, and one action leads to another, and it snowballs. Personally, when I moved to Atlanta and I was hustling, doing 4 different freelance jobs, living on my brother's couch, like just graduated college. So I'm just sitting here trying to get a job in the field that I want to do, which was audio engineering at the time. And I had this job where these people would call you up and you could be a stagehand for these really big acts. So people like Red Hot Chili Peppers, Coldplay, all that stuff. You're the guy that's pushing the carts around and helping build the stage because they need hands to do that. And I had a little bit of experience in it. Where that comes into play, though, is there's a lot of people on stage and you're always interacting with different people. And I made the most conscious effort to learn everybody's name before each event. And I kid you not, this was a Red Hot Chili Peppers event. Everybody would always go around in a circle and you'd say your name and then what you would kind of specialize in so they would know where to put you. And while they were going around in the circle, this is like 50 people, they would say a name and I would just like try and ingrain that into my brain. And it paid off. So there was this guy, I'm going to say his name, Dusty, and I had to lift something and he was trying to push something. And out of nowhere, I just said, oh, let me help you with that, Dusty. And he just gave me this look like, oh, I didn't introduce myself to him. So then we kind of just like struck a conversation, whatever it may be. And a little bit afterwards, he emailed me. I think I gave him my information, and he happened to be one of the lead sound technicians. Well, actually, you might know the place, Gwinnett Arena.
Yeah.
So Gwinnett Arena is another arena right next to Atlanta, and it's where a lot of concerts and everything happen. And it just so happened that he was working that day just to like get an extra buck, and I just so happened to like go out of the way to like, oh, I know your name. Let me help you with this thing. And it was coming from a good place, right? So that led to another free time gig where now I was doing sound in the arena. I was the guy mixing the soundboard or turning on and off the lights for bands like One Direction and things like that. All from me saying this one guy's name. Then that led to another gig, a full-time gig at a recording studio. Then that led to like my job at the Chive and all that stuff. All from one little thing of saying, hey man, let me help you with this. Right. And just I want to stress the little things in interaction with people.
I mean, it's so amazing how connected the world really is. Mm-hmm. I was in Iceland a couple of weeks ago, and I just randomly ran into a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in years. And it's amazing how connected the world can be, but it's more amazing how the world can be connected if we choose for it to be.
I almost spit out my coffee. Yeah, that was so good.
Come on, man. Let's snap, man. Yeah. It's just amazing, the level of choice that we have to affect each other, to network, and more importantly, to connect. Mm-hmm. Those connections that we can make, it's something that's always amazed me. And even, being on this book tour, I've been on a 9-city book tour. We have one more city left in San Francisco, California, where I used to live. The connections that have been made on this book tour, there are people who just come up and they just want to just talk. They want to converse. They want to just talk about life. How can we move forward together? Mm-hmm. What can I do for you? And wanting nothing from you. Yeah. It's amazing how connected the world can be if we choose for it to be.
There is one quote that I was talking to before we got on the podcast. Could you say the quote and then could you relate it to maybe a story or something that has affected you personally in your life?
The quote we're talking about, and I have to first say, I feel, and I know everyone may feel this way, but I feel like I've always had the best father any human could ever have. So I always thank him for making me and who I am today and really contributing to who I am today. He actually shared this with me. We were just kind of having a dialogue about different things that may happen in life and how we deal with them. And the quote goes like this. He says, son, gold is never purged in a freezer, but rather it must be sent through the fire in very high temperatures in order to burn off all of the impurities that halt it from being pure and precious. He went on to say, embrace and outlast your fire, and you will come out the other end as pure gold. So, first off, fire quote. Fire quote. No pun intended on the fire quote. No pun intended on the fire quote, but it's so amazing how impactful that can be. So I'll share a story. Again, I was on a flight. Apparently, I was flying the whole time I was writing this book, but I was on a flight, and this is in the book, and I'm sitting on the window, at the window seat, and the captain comes on. I'm flying into Atlanta, Hartsville, and he comes on as we're getting ready to land his normal, ladies and gentlemen, we are now about to make our initial descent to Atlanta, Hartsville, Jackson Airport. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing. Whatever else they say.
You can tell you've flown maybe once or twice.
That year I had like 252 segments flying. But so I'm looking out the window, and when I tell you, the way the gases mixed with in the sky, it was the most beautiful sight any human could have ever witnessed. I mean, the sky was adorned with a kaleidoscope of colors, your blues, your reds, your yellows, and it was just absolutely beautiful. And you could actually hear people looking out the window and just seeing them sigh at the beauty of the creation that was there to be witnessed. And then Captain Hagen comes back on and he says, "Look, ladies and gentlemen, we're now about to make our final approach into Atlanta, Hartsfield, Jackson, where the weather is 60 degrees, gloomy skies, visibility is 1 mile." And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. Now, in the book, it's called The White Side of the Cloud, and it's about perception. Here we are in the same space, okay? But on the top of the cloud, it's the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. Beautiful. But in the same space below the cloud were all the makings for the most gloomy day anybody could ever witness. 1 mile of visibility is not great. Gloomy, 1 mile visibility, cloudy, rainy, wet, not the greatest. But what I took from that story, comparing it to the quote that my father gave me, is regardless of where you are in life, your perception will determine how you perceive where you are in life and if you continue to push through that fire. Because we were in the same space. But are you going to allow your perception to be above the cloud? Or are you going to allow your perception to be below the cloud? In the same space. You know, when I hear my father talk about that quote, and when we discussed it after the book was published, I asked him, I said, what made you continue to put this quote out there all my life? And he said, gold doesn't remember how it became gold. That right there is gold too.
I was about to just cuss right there. Like, man, that's such a good quote.
Gold doesn't remember how it became gold. It's just gold. I equate that to oftentimes in life, we always say, gosh, man, I miss the good old days. Well, if you think about it, those good old days that you're talking about, you were never in those days and just paused and said, I think I'm living the good old days right now. You never thought that to yourself. You just lived and you became and you dealt with things and you got past it and you grew and you got better. So now you look back in retrospect and you say, man, we were living the good old days. So what I encourage everyone to do, just like the gold that doesn't remember becoming gold, make new good old days. We control the destiny of if we make new good old days, even in the process of being purified.
The only thing I would be a devil's advocate to that would be the concept of learning from your mistakes. So obviously what would you say to learning from what has happened in the past?
Perfect question. So in the book, there's a chapter called What If versus What Is. And it starts off kind of with a hyperbole of what's the difference between what if versus what is. And when you break it down in its most simplistic form, the difference is one ends with F and the other ends with S. That's the most simplistic difference. Yeah. But as we get into it, the what if is basically everything that has happened, what you really can't control because it's already done. The what is what you still have the ability to affect. Now, in this chapter, I speak about the time and energy and focus that we spend on the what if we transition that time, energy, and focus to the what is, will not only lead a better present, but will forge a better future. And then I go back and to say, that is not to say that we don't learn from the what if, but it's more so how do we learn from the what if, which is this. So the simple equation 2 + 2 = 4. How we learn that, and this is in the book as well, we learn that really in a 3-step process from our past. The first step was our first grade teacher, Miss Delphin. Lord, I love her. She was great. She looked at me and she said, Pierre, 2 + 2 = 4. So someone told us and we just accepted it to be gold. Okay, 2 + 2 has to equal 4. But we still didn't learn yet. We were just accepting what we were told. Then the second phase had to happen. We had to learn the things around the equation. So we had to learn addition. We had to learn subtraction. We had to learn multiplication, division, arithmetic. So we had to learn everything that went into the equation and then couple that with what our first grade teacher told us. But learning still did not take place yet from the what if. learning doesn't take place until the third phase happens, which is when you finally see two red apples and you see two more red apples. You combine that with your learning of arithmetic with what your first grade teacher told you. And now learning can take place. So I take that very simple equation. I ask myself, how do we learn from the past, which is the what if? Okay. So the first step, what happened? You list out, here's what happened in the situation. Here was the obstacle. Here was the difficulty that I faced. Okay. That's step one. Step two, now let's learn everything around it. What emotions was I feeling at the time? Who did I enlist to consult me on the situation? What actions did I take? What actions didn't I take? So you get all the information surrounding the situation from the past that occurred. And then remember that last phase, when you're faced with it again and have the opportunity to apply said learnings, to apply what you've learned from the past situation, to apply what you were told or what you were consulted on. Now you have the opportunity to not only learn from the past, but make a different decision and move forward toward a better path.
That's such a thoughtful answer. After you've released the book, how's it been? How has the reception been? This is your first book, correct?
This is my first book,
so
correct.
How has it been dealing with the thought of, who's this guy to write a book? It took you 10 years to write a book. For those that don't know or that aren't watching, the book's only 100 pages, right? And I mean, you started a really long time ago writing the book. There could be some criticism like, well, why isn't your book 800 pages? Yeah, which I guess could be given a testament to, hey, make it as concise as possible. But what has the criticism been, and how have you overcome that? Because I myself, you know what? I'll let you answer. I don't want to steal the show.
So great question. You know, when you've written a book that teaches about life and how to overcome things, people sometimes think that you didn't have to reread your own chapters to get some strength as well. You know, in writing the book, and this is actually in the book where I spoke about this, there were moments that I asked myself that exact question: who am I to write a book? Who am I that people should listen to? I mean, I'm just a guy from Houston, Texas, why me? You see, we all face those times of self-doubt. And even when I put the book together and it was 100 or 101 pages, however many pages, I still thought to myself, even though I had a book that was published, I thought to myself, gosh, I mean, people are going to look at this book and what is this, a brochure? Why is this thing so short? So we all have those moments of self-doubt. And it is in those moments that I have to even encourage myself to say, yeah, you're right. That's a difficulty. And that's a what if. But if I stay spending time focused on that what if, see, I have to take my own advice. I'll give you a quick story. The first city that I did the book tour in was Washington, D.C. The night before I flew to Washington, D.C., so for you all that don't know, I'm lactose intolerant, but I do not abide by the rules. I went downstairs the night before and I walked across the street to CVS and I bought a pint of ice cream. I was treating myself. Had a pint of ice cream. I only took my ID and I took my debit card. I woke up the next morning to go to Washington, D.C., realized I lost my wallet, lost my ID, lost my debit card. And now I'm thinking to myself, my Uber's 3 minutes away. What do I do? So I said, this is absolutely terrible. Of course, I used some different words that we won't put on the podcast. But I was like, this is awful. But then I thought to myself, I can't teach people and tell people to take your situation and focus on, learn from the what if, but live in the what is to forge a better future if I don't do it myself. So I said, you know what? I have Cash App. I have Venmo. I have good friends that'll let me borrow something until I get my debit card back, and I'll Cash App and Venmo, and I have a passport. I'm going with nothing.
Oh, I was going to say, well, how would you overcome the license? But you have a passport. No, you got it.
Yeah, you got to have something.
Yeah.
So I grabbed my passport. I got out of the house, and my good friend, Brian Barry Austin, he put me up at his house. He let me Cash App and Venmo and for everything. And that was just the kickoff to this very book tour. I had to live and eat my own words. So long answer, but
No, man, I think that's super powerful. I think the reason I asked that is because there's a lot of people in the audience, and myself included, that when I took the leap to start doing YouTube and this podcast in general, who am I to take people's time away and be, I feel like podcasts are a very intimate situation because you are asking to be the closest to their earlobes and like into their brain. You're literally speaking to you right now, the listener. And I don't take for granted the amount of time that you are allowing me to spend time with you. So that in and of itself, I feel so bad going back and listening to like just my first 10 podcasts. Not only that, interviewing my guests, but I think my fourth interview was so bad. I felt so happy that the guy was understanding for it. But I want to drive across the point that you have to just start doing something.
Yes.
And I think a lot of success comes from people realizing that if you set forth to do something, you say you're going to do it, and you actually start implement, even if you didn't even say you were going to start doing it,
right,
just by your actions in and of themselves are way more powerful than you saying you're going to do something. There was a diagram I just saw, and I'll try and replicate it as much as possible, but it's like coming up with a great idea, like talking about a great idea, then like planning it. And then there's an arrow going, the next step is releasing it out to the world. But then the arrow goes right past that step, and it says thinking about really awesome stuff. And then it just creates the loop again. And if you don't finish stuff, you're not going to go anywhere. So like you have, even if it's the most simplest task of, if you want to get fit, just go walk. Just go walk for 30 minutes or whatever it may be. Then the more that you start to get better or you start to accomplish things, then it just starts to snowball on top of it.
I mean, I could not agree with you more. For me, when it came to the Flight of the Phoenix, it was so much about what you're saying, which is just go and do. And the interesting thing is when you tell yourself to go and do, you're going to have a lot of yay sayers, and you're also going to have a lot of naysayers. But I talk about this in the book. Sometimes the biggest naysayer in our lives is the man or woman looking at us in the mirror. Just like we have to tell our naysayers, hey, listen, I respect your opinion, but I'm going forward. In the book I talk about, sometimes you have to look in the mirror and you have to tell your biggest naysayer, hey, I'm too strong for this. I'm too strong to sit here and do nothing. I told my sister, I may fail with this book, but I also may not fail. And the beautiful thing about failure, we often say, you learn the most things from failure, which is true. But we look at failure and say, well, what if it fails? It might. But the other question that we have to start asking ourselves is, what if we don't fail? And if we don't fail, what if we can teach others? What if you don't fail? What if we all continue to move forward? My sister, she asked me for about 3 years, when are you going to publish the book? When are you going to publish the book? And I would tell her, I'm going to publish the book when it's done. And then she would say, well, when is it going to be done? I said, I don't know when it's going to be done, but I'll know that I know when I know it's done. I finished the book essentially around 2000, let's say 2018. Finished the book 2017, 2018. And I was just waiting. I was waiting, just like I never wrote unless I felt inspired. I didn't want to publish it on my terms. I wanted to know when it was time to publish it. So I'll tell a quick story. I grew up from very humble beginnings. I mean very humble beginnings. So when I went to study abroad, I basically had to sell everything that I had just to afford to go study abroad. And I get to Germany and later Prague, Czech Republic, and I'm studying there. And I'm on my way home, because I was flying on a buddy pass. On my way home, one of the biggest airlines in Germany went on strike, Lufthansa. So of course, every revenue passenger that was on Lufthansa, they rolled over onto Delta. Mm-hmm. So now all the standby and the buddy pass people, we're stuck in Germany.
Yeah.
Now this time, it wasn't even Facebook yet. It was the Facebook. It was back in the gap.
Yeah.
So, and technology wasn't quite there yet. So I'm the Facebooking my dad and letting him know the situation. And I'm pretty much stuck in Germany for almost 2 weeks with very little funds because I had used the funds for the study abroad program and funds are running out. So much so that I began to eat once a day and I was staying in the airport. Waiting to get out, but all of the revenue passengers were rolling over onto Delta. About a week into it, I met a guy, an American family. He was with his family, his wife and his 2 daughters, and he was a pilot, so they were flying also on buddy passes. But of course, he had higher status because he was a pilot.
Yeah, he's got to get back to his job.
He got to get back to his job. But even he couldn't get out because the revenue passengers from the strike were coming and buying or taking over the flights for Delta. So I meet them and we're stuck there, and essentially they had 2 seats. They got his wife and his older daughter on the flight. And now it's me, him, and his younger daughter. We're stuck in Germany, still can't get out. He gets online and says, "Hey, there are people getting out in Berlin. We're gonna go there." I said, "Hey, I got to be honest with you. I can't afford to, Mitch. I can't afford to change my flight to Berlin. And I'm just going to stay here and keep my fingers crossed." He said, "Hey, man, don't worry about it. Hop in the car with us. We're going to go together." So we hopped in, get on the Autobahn. We're knocking down. We get there. We can't get out. So he says, "Well, there are people getting out of Frankfurt." I said, "Man, I really appreciate it. I'm going to just sit tight here and wait. I can't afford to change my flight." He said, "Don't worry. Get in with us. I'll pay to change it." Let me get in. Random stranger. Let me get in with his family. Took me to Frankfurt. Paid for my flight change. Long story short, we were stuck for another week. The man put me up in a hotel, basically fed me every day. On the last day, they called his name, and his daughter and him, they stood up. I hugged him. I said, "You don't know how much this meant to me for a random stranger to show an act of kindness to another random stranger. But I promise you one day, I'm going to find you, and I'm going to thank you properly." We hugged each other. We embraced. He got on the plane. He said, "I hope you get on." And I'm sitting there sweating bullets because now I'm stuck in Frankfurt and I have no clue how I'm going to get on.
Yeah.
I'm a teenager. I have no clue what I'm going to do. So they call my name. I get on the plane. I've never been more relieved to be on a plane. I get on. I see him and I run to him. I hug him and I thank him. I said, "Let me pay you back. Give me your number. Give me your email. I'm going to pay you back one day." He said, "You don't owe me anything except one day I want you to tell the story and I want you to pay it back to mankind. That's all I want." I almost dropped tears right then and there. I sat down, flew home. And by the way, this was in 2006. And in 2018, mind you, my sister had been asking me, when am I going to publish the book? I said, "I'll know when I know it's time to publish it." 2018, I'm on a flight to Houston, coming home from work. And I'm gathering my things. We've landed. I'm gathering my things. And remember I told you he was a pilot.
Yeah.
This is now, think how many years from 2006 to 2018. We're talking 12 years later. I'm gathering my things and I'm walking down the aisle. I'm getting off the plane, minding my business. And I look forward toward the galley and I see a familiar face. And it's Mitch. He looks at me. I look at him. I drop everything right there and I just sprint to him. He's running to me. I'm running to him. The passenger's like, "What the heck is going on?" We hug each other. I embrace him and I say, "Mitch, you don't understand how much you changed my life. Man, listen, I've been waiting for the sign to publish a book and it's finally here." I tell that story because how many things in the world had to connect in order for me to meet Mitch again 12 years later. He had to be flying that plane. I had to be working that day in Mississippi. I had to be taking that flight back. He still had to be a pilot. He couldn't be retired. I still had to be with the same company. There are so many. I had to not be in first class because they usually let them off first and then the pilots come out. There are so many variables that had to align for that connection to happen again. So I tell that story because, like we talked about at the beginning, we don't know the power of connections, whether they're 2006 or 12 years later. So embrace those connections, find those connections. And it was just an amazing thing, man. It was an amazing moment.
That's awesome. the only thing I would the only thing I would say about it is, wouldn't it contradict the idea of just doing something as opposed, like, so just to play in your sister's role of, hey, you said you were going to be writing this book, you've been writing it. Why was it that thing had to happen? Because that's not in the book, is it?
That's in the book.
Okay, so
actually, no, that portion is not in the book.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, I read the book, I don't remember reading it. So why was it that you needed to have that life event happen as opposed to releasing it before that?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in just doing, but I'm also a big believer in knowing when it's time to just do. So I'm a believer in you listen to inspiration. Mm-hmm. When I started to write the book and I had the doubts of why would people want to listen to me, I said, I'm not going to pay attention to that. I'm just going to do. I'm going to do my part. I'm going to start writing. And I just wrote and wrote and wrote.
I got it. So it's more coming from my opinion of what I'm understanding. It's more, I'm doing it for me and I'm not going to be doing it for others.
Right.
And in and of itself, knowing that I am enough to just dictate when I need to do this.
Right.
I'm doing it on my own terms.
Right. Because if you're doing anything for someone other than yourself, are you really doing it? Or are you doing it for someone else? So when she continued to ask, when are you going to publish? It was never a question of if I was going to publish the book. The only question, and I didn't know what the event would be to cause me to publish it, but I knew and I just felt that there would be something specific that I would be at peace and say, now, the universe says it's time to publish it. But here's the other thing. I believe that if I would have published it before, prematurely, I wouldn't have even had the understanding of some of the chapters between finishing and the experiences that I experienced after finished writing and the experiences from actually publishing it. After writing the book, for example, the Mile High Pinball, initially, it was just nothing was wrong with her. Sometimes we have to just get back up and continue down our path. It wasn't until the book was finished and it was in final edit that it really sunk with me that not only do you have to get back up, but the other side, we have the opportunity to affect more and more people. And I believe that inspiration came because when I look at the status of our country, that wasn't, it was the case, but it wasn't nearly as much as it is right now, as far as people not choosing to positively affect. So I believe that, yes, sometimes we have to just do our part. Get to writing if you want to be a writer. Go to the gym if you want to, be healthier. Make a meal plan, but also listen to inspiration. Mm-hmm. You have to listen to inspiration.
Awesome. So there's a couple questions I ask at the end of each podcast. Mm-hmm. First one is, why do you do what you do?
I have a yearning and a drive and a hunger to see people live a life of no regret. There's actually a chapter in the book called No Regret and another chapter called 3210. And both of those really stem around, everything in life, including life itself. The clock will eventually tick down to zero. How you live those tickings of the clock will determine what legacy you leave on this planet. As great as Steve Jobs, as great as he was and all the innovation that he left behind and all the money that he made, the most impactful thing Steve Jobs did for me, at the very end, he said, you can make all this money, you can change lives, you can be innovative, but remember, you can't pay someone to carry the disease for you. He had pancreatic cancer. You basically what he was saying was, you can't take it with you. So what you have to find is find the things that make you happy. Find the things that you can do to make someone else happy. That's a famous quote that everyone knows. People, let's see how it goes. People will remember like half of what you do, but they'll always remember how you make them feel.
I relate that to speeches.
Right.
So whenever somebody's giving a speech, you never really, even a week out, you won't remember what that speech was about, but you definitely remember how you felt during that speech.
You definitely remember how you felt. So what drives me, if I'm speaking at a high school, if I'm speaking at a university, if I'm doing a podcast, this is my first one, or if I'm doing a book signing, if I can connect with one person and show them that regardless of what they're dealing with, there is a way to continue to move forward towards your path of greatness, down your path of greatness. Regardless of what you're dealing with, you can create and leave your legacy in the wet concrete of life. If I can do that for one person, my purpose is served.
You strike me as one of those guys that if you are a close friend or even an acquaintance, you bring up everybody that's around you.
I hope so.
It's like if anybody's ever feeling down or whatever the situation, or you could be having the best of times, like just enter in Pierre and you could add 10 more percent to the happiness.
Right.
Second question is, in order to get to where you're at today, let's say way before when you wrote that first inspirational sentence,
right.
Best sentence you've ever written.
Best sentence ever.
What advice would you give to somebody to finish? To get to the place where, hey, we're having a conversation about a book that you published. Somebody wants to write a book. What advice would you give?
The advice that I would give is make sure, first off, whatever you're doing, whether it's writing a book or starting a cooking channel, whatever you're doing, make sure that you're doing it for the right reason. And that reason needs to be, this is something that you're hungry about, something that inspires you, and something that you actually love. You know, when you do what you love, even for your career, you don't feel like you're working. You almost feel like you're stealing. God said, paying me to do this. So that would be the first thing that I actually recommend people do. Make sure you're doing it for the right reason. But the second thing would be exactly what we talked about, which is sometimes you just have to do. You know, I talk about in the book, and there's a part in the book where I literally say, whatever your change is that you need to incorporate in your life, stop reading right now. Literally, and I wrote this, literally stop reading and go and do that. Start it right now. You know, the biggest thing with humans, we're such creatures of habit that trying to break those habits and to do something different. For example, most people brush their teeth every day. I know I do. But also most people start on the same side of their mouth every single day when they brush their teeth.
I never thought about that. That's crazy.
I saw every
mind blown.
Yeah, mind blown. Every time I brush my teeth, I start bottom left. Every time. I was speaking to a high school last week, and I asked. They said, "Yeah, of course I do." I said, "But why?" They said, "Well, this is what I do." But here is the true reason why. There is no incentive to change. So for those same people, I don't know which side you start, and I'll say maybe upper right. For you and I start bottom left, you start upper right. If someone walked in right now and said, I will give you $1 million to change which side you brush your teeth on, you would change what side you brush your teeth on because there's an incentive. So what I tell everyone, when it comes to your passion, step one, make sure you're doing it for the right reason. Step two, sometimes we have to just go out, start, and do. And then step three, find your incentive or find your why. Simon Sinek talks about it. You have to find your why. And if your why is not intrinsic, then we can't move forward.
You know what's funny is I started asking that why question before,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know. I knew of Simon, but I didn't know that. Oh, that definitely stems from hearing other podcasts, but they listened to him in that book that he wrote.
Right.
The other thing is that I think it is okay that from day to day, if your why changes.
Oh, yes.
You don't know where you're going to be in a year, so I think some people can get so obsessed with, man, is this like the perfect...
Right.
If I relate this to, if I were to ask you, so what do you do for a living? And that could change from day to day. Like some days you could be in a situation and you could be like, well, I actually just wrote a book.
Yeah.
Or it could be like, oh, I'm in sales or
Yeah.
whatever that may be. Depending on who you're talking to, sometimes you might want to say different things, you know?
I couldn't agree more. You know, when we talk about finding your why, I always bring it back to, like you said, the why can change. You know, when I was a kid, if you ask every kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? Chances are, once they actually do grow up, they're probably not what they said they wanted to be. Now, there are some. I wanted to be an astronaut, which I have no desire to do that right now. Shout out to NASA, nothing against astronauts. But the point is, our whys change, and oftentimes that comes from our influences, our experiences, things that we see, and it's okay for it to change. And even when I'm speaking to high schoolers, I tell them, it's okay to not know what you want to be, but you need to understand why you want to be. So you don't have to know the what, but knowing the why, even if it's to affect lives, to change lives positively, to be great, to leave a legacy, find out what makes you happy. And that may even change or be altered. But if you live a life of living and what makes you happy, I mean, it's almost impossible to fail. Almost.
What's an actionable step to what you just said?
What?
What's an actionable step for people listening right now? What's an actionable step to the advice that you're giving?
I say this in the book. Actually write it down. And here is why. There's science that shows, and Harvard actually studied this, that things that we write down we're much more likely to do, because we naturally as humans, we have a desire to accomplish things. I'm so bad that I will do stuff, go back to write it down just to cross it off. That may be the Capricorn in me. I do that. But I would say the actionable step is to write things down that you want to accomplish them, and check them off the list. Move forward.
So recently I've started to write 3 things for each day, and it makes leaps and bounds. Now, some people could say, oh, I'm not a list person. Write it down, see what starts happening. And don't make it something so lofty like, oh, I'm going to finish this book today.
Right.
Like that whole thing. For me personally, I'll give you an example. Just yesterday was, in order to move the needle forward in where I want to be, it's send an email to so-and-so about an interview. It's, make sure that I send you this calendar invite to make sure that you know when to come, the address to come, make sure that's all there, you know? That kind of stuff. And then also I want to edit and get out my assets for my podcast. I want to make sure I walk 30 minutes today. Put that down. Or I want to drink a gallon of water this day, or whatever that may be. It could be something so simple as write that email to that person. And once you got that done, cross it off and move on to the next thing. But it's so powerful if you start having intention behind your actions from day to day. That's the rocket. There's the NASA right there.
There's the NASA, right? That is amazing. I was just telling my buddy yesterday that, when we look at marathon runners, we're amazed. I mean, what is it, 26.2 or 26.1, something like that? Yeah. So a lot of miles. Mm-hmm. But the most beautiful thing to a marathon to me is every single marathon that's ever finished starts with one step. There's not one marathon that started with 10 steps. It's literally one step. And that's what the beauty of writing things down. Yes, you will reach your marathon. You will reach that finish line. But it will start with one step, and that's for everybody. Take that one step, write that one thing down, accomplish that, and one day you will be at that finish line. Now, you may not finish first if it's a marathon, because I won't.
Yeah.
But you'll be there.
You will finish something. You will have your product out in the world, and people will have a better understanding of your principles as a human being.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of concepts that are reiterated on this podcast. A lot of what we've talked about, other guests have brought up, and a lot of the stuff that I listen to, self-development, business, entrepreneur, all that kind of stuff. There's a common theme of just doing it, all that kind of stuff, but there's a reason why it keeps coming up. Mm-hmm. And I think this is another example of it. And if you are inspired by what you're hearing today, please just start doing something. One question that I've started to ask, and I'll finish it off with this, is personally or business-wise, what's an investment that you've had in the last year that has had the best ROI for you?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. Investment that I've had over the last year with the best ROI. Within the last year, I have taken, and this is actually my favorite investment, probably in the last 10 years. I've taken on 2 additional mentees. I've invested in 2 young men that are in high school right now, and to be able to watch their development over time, to be able to watch where they started as well as their grades now, as well as their behavior from the beginning and their behavior now, to be able to keep in touch with them and see how they're progressing. I tell all of my friends this that are at where I am in the corporate world, if we're not mentoring at least 1 or 2 of the next generation, we're failing. I say that this is my best investment because regardless of all the accolades, bestseller, author, doing great with my career, regardless of all of the accolades, this investment is for when I'm dead and gone. When I'm gone, the legacy that will be left behind will be one of greatness, one of overcoming, one of you telling someone that you can make it, but more importantly, let me show you the way. Let me give you a blueprint with hopes that they do the exact same thing and it continues to trickle down. When we talk about stories that were passed from generation to generations, the Dr. MLKs, the JFKs, the reason why their stories are passed down is because their investment was not just into something, their investment was into a cause. And they were willing to die and give everything that they had for the progression of a cause. And that's why those people will be remembered for a lifetime, for lifetimes to come. That is probably my best investment that I've made recently, investment in the future.
It's interesting because you didn't say your book.
No, I love the book.
Yeah.
I love my book, and it's great. It's gotten great reviews, and people are really good. I mean, every day I'm getting text messages, I'm getting emails, reviews, and people are loving The Flight of the Phoenix, Living Forward. And I love the book, and there are more projects coming. But when it's all said and done, there's going to come a day when, just like the normal process of things, the book buzz will go down. But the legacy that I leave with the next generation, and the legacy they will leave with the next generation, that is what will cement the Flight of the Phoenix. When we think about the Phoenix, how it faced the biggest difficulty in the world, faced its own death, and was reborn. The only way it could be reborn, mythically, and live a longer life, and his wings would burn further, he would fly higher, and would be stronger. He had to face that. They had to face death. And that's what I want to do and impart upon the next generation. So yes, I love my book, but my greatest investment is into the next generation.
In people.
Speaking
of your book, where can people find it?
Excellent question. So most of my social media is the exact same. Try to make it simple. It's at Mr. Pierre Simon.
Can you spell it just for?
Yes. At Mr. Pierre Simon is MrPierreSimon. That's my Instagram as well as my Twitter. The book right now is found on Amazon. It's found on Barnes & Nobles, Apple iTunes, Nook, Kobo, Kindle, Friesen Press. Basically, everywhere that you can buy a book online, The Flight of the Phoenix, Living Forward is available. I have the links on my social media. Unfortunately, if you haven't made the book tour yet, there's only one more city in San Francisco. I'll be posting the location on my social media. If you want to come to San Francisco, we're actually going to do a book signing on the Golden Gate Bridge. Wow. So I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, I'll have a link to the book and your socials on the podcast notes. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your time, man. Great conversation. I hope at least one person was affected by this and will go out and start doing the things that they have in their mind.
I really appreciate you having me. Like I said, this is my first podcast. Didn't know what to expect, but just talking about it. And like you said, if one person is affected positively, job is done. We can move forward to the next day.
Yeah, I'm very tempted. No, but if you're listening right now, I just dab on some passion. Yeah, that was a very great dab. All right, guys, until next episode, I would really appreciate it if you did get value out of this episode, if you would share it with a friend. You could also hit up Mr. Pierre Simon on all the socials and myself if you want to tag us and say, hey, listen to this awesome podcast, was inspired. I'd be like, cool, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Love getting the feedback. Till next episode, live a life of abundance. I'll see you guys next time.